Wow, it's a really, really warm day. Hello and welcome to the Daily Bible Reading Show. I want to talk to you about the trial of Jesus. And this is John chapter 18. Jesus is being questioned by the high priest. And what's happening there is that this episode of Jesus being interrogated is actually sandwiched between two other episodes of Peter. Peter being put on trial, Peter being asked questions by the high priest's servants. So what you find is Peter and then Jesus and Peter again, kind of like a sandwich. And essentially what it's saying is that there are two trials happening. There's Jesus who's being put under pressure, but also those who follow Jesus will be put under the same pressure, will be under the same kind of persecution as well. So there's an application there for us today. So if we look at John chapter 18, let's look at the first episode with Peter. It begins, I think, in verse 15 with Peter following Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. And Peter is being accompanied by this unnamed disciple. It's presumably John who wrote the gospel account. So Peter and John are following Jesus into the high priest's house after Jesus has been arrested, after everyone else has abandoned Jesus. It's really good that Peter and John are still following Jesus. But, only John makes it through to the high priest's house. Because curiously enough, John is known to the high priest for some reason. We don't know how or why. But John makes it through and Peter is stuck at the gate. And so what John does is he doubles back and he tries to get Peter through the gate by speaking to the person in charge, which turns out to be a little girl, a servant girl. And this servant girl asks Peter, you're not one of Jesus' disciples, are you? Very innocent question, but Peter denies Jesus. This is the first of three denials. Peter says, no, I'm not. And that's really interesting because it's a kind of like a soft denial. It's just a little girl asking him, hey, you're not one of those crazy Christians I've heard about, are you? And he probably just doesn't take it too seriously. He's already following Jesus, and he just doesn't want to cause more trouble. And so he just doesn't want to explain himself. He says, no, I'm not following Jesus. And this first episode with Peter ends with him standing around this fire, warming himself with, it says, the other servants and the high priest officials. And essentially Peter has found himself a new group of friends. And the whole idea is that social pressure is all it takes for Peter to deny Jesus. It's not some intense persecution. It's not him denying Jesus outright. That's just wanting to fit in, not wanting to cause trouble, just wanting to find a comfortable spot where he can warm himself. And saying to us that sometimes, denying Jesus might look like just wanting to fit in, not wanting to stick out and cause any trouble. Because you think you're following Jesus, but actually you take a step back because it's inconvenient. So that's the first thing with Peter. And then when you look at Jesus being questioned by the high priest asks him about two things: his disciples and his teaching. Essentially his politics and his theology. Who's following him and what's he talking about God? And, Jesus being questioned directly, why have you said, who's following you? He, interestingly enough, deflects the question. He says, I've taught openly in the synagogues and the temple. Why don't you ask them? Why don't you ask one of your own friends? In the temple, meaning the high priest officials, all the priests would have been there to hear and to be witnesses of what Jesus taught in the past. And essentially what Jesus is saying is that you can check it out for yourself. Nothing has been said in secret, and therefore, even your own friends are reliable witnesses when it comes to who Jesus is and what he stands for. But one of the officials doesn't like what Jesus says and slaps him in the face and says, how dare you talk like this to the high priest? And Jesus says, if I've said something false, testify to it. Otherwise, why did you strike me? And it's striking that Jesus is punished for speaking the truth, whereas earlier on, Peter is accepted for speaking a lie. So there's a contrast there between Peter and Jesus already, but there's also a contrast between what it means to speak the truth, to testify the truth. Well, the truth is the truth, whether it's Jesus or someone else speaking the truth. And Jesus is so confident and so consistent. What he's saying is that he can say, essentially just Google about me or read the Bible for yourself about me and form your own opinion. You don't actually need God to come down and to speak to you directly to tell you what you probably already should know yourself. And there's a consistency, there's a kind of reliability to the truth itself that even if the high priest's own friends told him about what Jesus said, there will be enough to represent accurately who Jesus is and what he said about God. So we've seen Peter, kind of like fudging the truth. We've seen Jesus testify to the truth as the truth. But finally we come back to Peter again. It's really interesting because we continue on with Peter standing with all the officials by the fire, and then someone else says to Peter, "You're not one of those disciples, are you?" And Peter says again, "No, I'm not." The exact same phrasing as the little girl, the exact same answer that Peter gives in the negative. That's really interesting because he isn't saying, "Are you a Christian?" He's not directly accusing him, but kind of like giving him a way out. Saying, "You're not one of those Christians, are you?" And it's just so much easier to deny in the negative. You say, "Yeah, no, I'm just confirming your assumption. You're just assuming I'm not a Christian, so I'm just confirming this assumption." But then, someone who actually has seen Peter before, who is apparently a relative of the guy that Peter cut off his ear earlier on, just that night in the garden, he recognizes Peter and says, "Didn't I see you, with Jesus that night?" And here Peter really says, "No, I'm not with Jesus." And at the point of time, it says, he heard the cock crow. And this is in fulfillment with what Jesus had foretold earlier in chapter 13, that Peter would deny him 3 times when the cock crows. And what it says to us is that, Peter is denying not just once, but twice and 3 times, and not realizing that he is denying Jesus when he is denying Jesus. And it's only when Jesus' own words are fulfilled that he realizes that he sinned, that he really has disowned his Lord. What that says to us is that sometimes you probably don't realize what we're doing when we're denying the truth. And sometimes we think we're okay. Sometimes we point a finger at other people and we think it's only the other people who will say these kind of things. But really, it takes God's word to reveal our hearts. It takes God's assessment of our hearts to reveal who we really are as, truth deniers, as comfort seekers, before we realize that we are a lot more like Peter than we are like Jesus. So, yeah, I'm almost home. It's really, really warm. 3 things we've seen today. Number 1, it doesn't take very much for us to deny Jesus. A lot of it is just seeking comfort. It's just being put under social pressure. And it's just very soft denial. Say, nope, I'm not with those guys, not with that church, I'm not with that crazy cult Christians. And number 2, the truth is the truth no matter who says it. And actually, by all means, read it directly from the Bible, check it out for yourself, and ask a Christian. But really, there are so many sources of the truth that you can find out for yourself that it is silly to think that you can't find out the truth for yourself. And number 3, all of us don't realize that we're a lot more like Peter than we realize. That actually, we all deny Jesus again and again every day. And it isn't until God reveals it in His Word, what our hearts are like, that we are able to see the sinfulness of our hearts, the deceitfulness of our hearts, and to come to Him for restoration and for forgiveness. Yep. Okay, I'm home. That was the trial of Jesus, but also the trial of everyone who follows Jesus to stand for the truth. Yeah. Hello. Hi.